Craig Spiesel, and welcome to the webinar. This is really an exciting time for OTA, and I should say for the industry, as we work towards our best practices and really help identify companies that are doing what we consider above and beyond to really help maximize consumer security and privacy. A little bit of a background here on what we call our honor roll. This is now in our, will be our 8th year of activities here of doing an audit, and we've evolved over time. The primary goal, as I shared, is really to move from compliance to stewardship. It's also about providing that positive affirmation to companies that are doing the right things and provide an incentive. And ultimately, we think that this is really important from a consumer perspective for and a brand's perspective for their brand value. But also it's about showing self-regulation and showing commitment of industry to doing the right things. So those are the goals, and as I mentioned, this will be the 8th year that we've done this. Every year the program evolves. So for example, to give you a background, we will be auditing approximately 1,000 websites based on the same criteria in the 3 major buckets: consumer protection, security, and privacy. And what you see here on the slide here is a sampling of the categories that we look at, and we compare each segment to each other. So as you'll see in the slides that Jeff will be walking through in a few moments, some of these categories were added over time. And for example, we used to have a category called Top 50 Social, and you'll hear a little more. That's really now been expanded to consumer services that include a wide range of organizations. The net result is we look at about 50 data attributes from multiple sites and services, scanning sites, evaluating, and each category, security, privacy, and consumer protection, can get up to 100 points each. We also award bonus points that you'll see about for emerging best practices. We want to recognize above and beyond, as well as penalty points, observed vulnerabilities, poor privacy practices, recent data loss incidents or breach and such. None of those vulnerabilities alone will preempt someone from making the honor roll, but the core companies will lose points. And ultimately, to make the honor roll, you have to score a minimum of 80% or better, providing that you do not fail any one category. So in other words, if you had a score of 50 in a category, that would be failing, even if your other points gave you a cumulative of 80 points or more. So we'll share more about that. But again, this is the whole idea of looking at these 3 buckets. Every year, the bar is raised based on what are best practices as well as the threat landscapes. I mentioned briefly that we've renamed the Social 50 to now what we're calling consumer services, and we're finalizing the terminology. But this is basically consumer-facing sites that are top-ranked, that collect consumer data and require you to log in, that are not banking or e-commerce. So you see there's a whole range of categories here. We have ID theft, credit monitoring, free IRS e-file sites. As some participants of the call may recall, we did an audit last month. We're now folded them into this category. So we'll see how everyone performs all across the board here. So again, that's a big category as well for us, and that's a slight change in our sampling, but expanding our sampling. To give you an example here, where are we today? So as I mentioned, we track each sector. You can see the social sites, which we're renaming consumer services, was the highest level of adoption last year for a lot of reasons. But we see other categories here, and we see the news and media sites the lowest. But again, this is the whole goal, is that we want to track adoption by each category, and we'll be evolving and expanding this. And the point here is you'll see that OTA members, we track our own adoption, and at 92.5%. We believe we should be walking the talk, so to speak. So we use the same guidance. As a condition of membership, we expect companies to adhere and adopt. And so in some respects, that's a great score. Personally, I like to see it at 100%. We also look at failing again, what sectors fail the most and why, and we'll drill into that. But again, the purpose of this webinar today is to provide you more of the methodology. And the last point thing, as I mentioned, is we recognize leaders, and it's about not only who makes the honor roll, we look at also in what category, and within each category, who made the top score. So for example, of all the scores, sites last year, Twitter got the #1 score. In addition, we look at each categories. So you should expect to see some type of public affirmation of this going forward. We may actually expand that in each category, the top 5. Again, we want to really recognize not only the honor roll, but really the best of the best. And so here's an example last year that we did the top 10 retailers. Again, these are based on revenues of the top 500 e-commerce sites, and then we evaluate against them. So we should expect more of that going forward. So Jeff, I want to turn it over to you, and maybe you can start to provide a little bit of a drill down here on the consumer protection element of the program.
Sure. So we're going to walk through a similar process for each of the 3 major buckets Craig described. So, and they're formatted very similarly. So the gray area is the baseline point. So that's the part that makes up the 100 points for each bucket. The green highlights the bonus points in this category, and the red, of course, is the penalty points. So, and then we've italicized things that are changing from year to year. They're either new or changed since last year. So in the consumer protection area, the primary earning of points comes from email authentication. And that means supporting SPF and DKIM, the 2 primary authentication methods, at the top level domains. Especially, we're increasing the weight for supporting it at the top level, and that's the domains that companies are known by, their primary website, as well as subdomains. So those might be ones used for marketing or other purposes. And then, in addition to the authentication itself, part of the 100 points is supporting ZMark, and we'll explain that a little more in a minute, both having a record and then asserting a policy of rejecting or quarantining messages that fail authentication. And this year we're increasing the weight within that 100 points for the reject policy, which is the most extreme or severe that you can put out there. Bonus points are offered for TLS, which is encrypting your email between servers so it can't be eavesdropped, for instance. For DNSSEC, which protects your domain infrastructure. And we're adding this year bonus points for IPv6. So we'll be scanning to see if it's being supported. And this is very early on, and that's what we do. We usually offer bonus points for emerging best practices, and so we're on the very front end of that. So we'll start to assess that. There are penalty points for if your domain is not locked, which means it's easy for someone to take it over administratively. And there's also penalty points new this year if you've had a malvertising incident since January of 2015. So, and we'll be looking at various logs available in the industry to assess that. So ultimately, this is kind of all under the umbrella of protecting consumers. The final thing, the little note at the very bottom of the slide there, is we're also going to look at another aspect of advertising, which is delineating native advertising, and Craig will talk about this a little more later, but on sites where kind of content is blended in with advertising, is it clear what's native content and what's an ad? Is it both clear in terms of the terms that are used to describe it and the way it is presented to the consumer? So drilling down a little bit more on the primary area here, email authentication. As I mentioned, there are 2 methods of email authentication that are used out there that are standards. SPF is one, and it really verifies you post a record in your DNS that says these are the IP addresses I send from, and the receiver can then check, hey, this claims to come from company.com. Do they send from these IP addresses? And if the answer is yes, you know that it's been validated. DKIM is signature-based, where you're actually signing the messages, and then you can decode that at the receiving end to make sure that the message arrived without being altered in transit. And so those two complement each other, and best practice is to use both on all domains where you send email. ZMark is a technology, a capability that sits on top of the two authentication methods. So it relies on one or both being present, and then it allows a sender to say, if my messages fail authentication, this is what I want you to do with them. That's the policy assertion element. That's the second one in from the left, where I can say either not assert a policy at all, or you can say I want you to quarantine these messages or reject these messages if they fail. And that's the ultimate. If you know your authentication is good for all your sending domains, you can tell the receiver, I want you to reject a message if it fails. That way, fake messages don't get into the inboxes of consumers. The other extremely beneficial aspect of ZMark is that it gives you reports. And those are the kind of the two icons on the right on the bottom there. It gives you the ability to see how your authentication is being received across all the various receivers out there, and it can help you fine-tune your authentication or see where maybe someone is trying to pretend to be you that's not you, and help you take down phishing sites, for instance.
Yeah, Jeff, this is Craig. I might want to interact here, is that the reason this is such a concern is the amount of fraudulent mail that's trying to trick consumers to download, to take over, to install malware, ransomware, deceptive, malicious links. So we think this is very important, and it is widely, as Jeff mentioned, widely supported. The White House, Department of Commerce, Homeland Security. So these are really standards, and we really think it's responsibility of companies to really maximize consumer protection. And so even though it's not their fault that it's occurring, you should need, the importance is enabling receiving networks, whether it's corporate networks or ISPs, to be able to detect if this mail is forged or spoofed.
Yeah, and we are seeing adoption in some of the sectors nearing 100%. So in some of the categories. So it has been out for a long time. It's very straightforward to implement. As I mentioned, TLS is the ability to encrypt data between email servers so that hackers can't eavesdrop or intercept messages and read them. And this is becoming a best practice as well. And we're starting to see more and more adoption. We currently have it as a bonus point element in this category, but over time we expect it to be rolled into the baseline as well.
Yeah, I also believe that some of the major email ISPs now are giving favorable treatment to mail that has TLS enabled. And so I do know Gmail, Outlook Mail, Yahoo, Comcast are all have deployed on that area. So, it's not only helps consumers, but if you are an email marketer, it's going to improve deliverability into the inbox for you.
Yeah, in fact, in Gmail, there is an icon, a little kind of locked or unlocked icon that tells you whether the email was secured in transit using TLS.
Great.
So new this year is assessment of IPv6 support, and really we're kind of getting in very early here. It's something that has a number of capabilities that can be beneficial from a protection standpoint, avoiding man-in-the-middle attacks, for instance. There are issues where it needs to be set up and properly configured. And so we're kind of on the early stages here of assessing who has it out there, and over time we'll be kind of enhancing our measuring of that and the configuration. Similar to SSL or TLS, you have to configure it right to make it work right. So right now we're kind of just taking a step of providing a few bonus points if you have IPv6 supported on your site.
Great. I'll kind of touch on the native advertising. For those of you who aren't aware, this has become a real high area of concern of the Federal Trade Commission and others on this whole blending of what is ads and what is content. And for years, the FTC has been looking at truth in advertising claims, taking action on TV advertising, print advertising, blogging that's not really disclosed. So earlier this year, the FTC released some guidance. We have subsequently met with the FTC. We have met with the Interactive Advertising Bureau. We've also met with Digital Content Next. And so what we're doing in this version of the honor roll, we're going to be assessing sites and looking at which ones, and inventory in a sense, what we consider having used in acceptable terms versus unacceptable terms, and looking to see how we can score against that. So there are terms, I think, that we believe that are clearly acceptable. So what we're suggesting may not be consistent with the Federal Trade Commission or some of the trade organizations on either side of the equation. But again, we think having terms that are very clear, such as presented by XYZ company, we think that's reasonable. Some of the other terms that we think that are not as clear would be unacceptable, and you could see that sites would lose points in those areas. And so again, we're talking about the honor roll. The very first slide talked about above and beyond compliance, and we're talking about online trust. So we think what's clear and understandable to consumers is very important. And also about not only the term used, but is that term clearly posted and conspicuous. So we've seen some perhaps disingenuous attempts to obfuscate what it is. And this is not the first time we have dealt with this issue. We do a pretty thorough audit of the top retailers on their unsubscribed practices. And again, some of the terms, some of the use, some of the font sizes, similar issues here. So again, I guess the message is be thinking about that on your site. And if you are having that, what we'll be doing is we'll be doing this. The primary sites that are focused on this are the consumer-facing sites that are news and media, that they use these type of implement native advertising. And just at a broader point, this is one of the challenges we're concerned about as an organization, because more and more consumers are running ad blockers for a combination concern of the security risk, they're concerned about the privacy risk, and they're also frustrated by the lack of clarity between native advertising and content on sites. So this is an opportunity, and so we're looking forward to seeing what results we get here. So Jeff, I'll hand it back to you on the security.
Okay. So similar to the previous category of consumer protection, we have the baseline points and then bonus and penalties. So the baseline points are primarily driven by assessing the server and SSL or TLS implementation on a site. And we use a couple publicly available tools as our primary input there, one from Qualys SSL Labs and one from High Tech Bridge. The change this year, and we'll in the next slide or two we'll see this, is that a component failure inside of that will equal an overall failure. And what came to light in the last year is that there were sites that did well in maybe 3 or 4 major categories, but they had supported old protocols or weak ciphers. And because of those weaknesses, the whole site was vulnerable, even though the other areas were good. So similarly to how we say in the honor roll you have to achieve 80%, but you can't fail any one category, we're kind of applying that down within this, where if you fail a subcomponent, you're going to fail the site security area. Most of these are very straightforward to fix and can be done very quickly and are usually a matter of configuration. Bonus points will be available this year, as in previous years, for extended validation certificates and for supporting always-on SSL, although we are increasing the weight for always-on SSL this year. It's become, like many things in the industry, more prevalent. You're seeing Google give preference to sites that support it. You're seeing the government mandating support of it within their own sites in the next brief period of time. And so we're putting increased weight on that as a best practice. Penalty points are similar to last year, except that we are now evaluating the types of certificates. There's kind of 3 levels. You can have a domain validated certificate, which really has not much validation associated with it. Organizationally validated, which would be abbreviated OV, and then extended validation, which is the EV. So we'll have penalty points this year for domain validated, because anyone can get that online very easily, and it just opens the door for a lack of transparency and for misuse. And so a stronger, more trustworthy way to get a certificate is the organizationally validated certificate.
Yeah, Jeff, I add on there, especially in certain areas, certainly, for example, the e-file sites, we see a lot of lookalike sites created, bogus sites, and typically they use a DV certificate because, again, it's just kind of there's no validation of the organization behind it. So that's why, getting back to the bonus points, the extended validation certificate is very important, and for I think brand protection and consumer protection as well.
So here's an example of what I was talking about. This is a screenshot out of the Qualys SSL Labs tool, and you can see that it assesses 4 major categories, excuse me, and there are a lot of details underneath this, but in this case, the protocol support is scoring only a 50, which is a failing level, and even though the overall score is a C, we're saying that that would equate to a failure in the site security category and therefore roll up to a failure for the honor roll. And so, and what we found, as I mentioned before, is that almost all the cases we see where this is the case, where there's a failure in a subcomponent, it's a configuration issue and just kind of keeping pace. Now, what we found over the years is that often when we start the process and start looking at sites, they may have low scores, and it's very straightforward to reconfigure them to go from a C or a B to an A or an A+, because a lot of this is just keeping pace with the latest available ciphers and protocol support and so forth. And it's a matter of just staying on top of it and being diligent about it, rather than there being having to do a major upgrade, for instance. So we really encourage sites to do continual monitoring in these areas, using some of these publicly available tools to assess themselves.
Yeah, Jeff, and in this case, these are simple things that are clearly going into an admin tool. The case of the certificate as a weak signature is very disappointing. NIST actually issued a mandate that was effective January 1st of 2015 to upgrade to SHA-2. And ironically, all the certificate authorities will provide you a free certificate. So this is really not a technical issue. It's really about operational discipline and management here. And so we encourage you to use these tools. As Jeff mentioned, we look at a combination score. We work with Qualys, and we have a customized tool with them, and then another company, High Tech Bridge, out of Geneva, that look at a lot of similar issues, and we look at that combined composite score. But again, a lot of very clear information that's actionable, that in this case, this company, while their tool shows a C, it would actually mean a fail, because you see that protocol support is less than the 55 that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to jump in on the privacy side here. So as Jeff provided you a good foundation of the consumer protection side of it, security, but we think privacy is equally as important. And we do this in 2 areas. The privacy score is split in the base points of your privacy policy, what you say and how you say it, and then we actually look at what's occurring on your site. And so the more third parties that you have on your site that, for example, that collect and share data with other fourth parties and others on the site, then you lose points in those areas. So that's how we look at that. Conversely, we look at what are those best practices. So new to this year, We've moved the do not track disclosure, so that must be part of your privacy policy on how you honor that, or if you don't honor it, you lose points if you don't have that in there. We also now require your privacy policy to have what we call a short layered notice, and there's multiple ways of doing that. But again, the whole idea is increased disclosure to the consumer with a consumer-centric view of what your privacy policy is versus a policy that's really designed to protect the company. Again, what can we do? Getting back to our first point, it's above moving beyond compliance to stewardship. There's some bonus points in here, and you'll see use of icons. We'll show you an example. Having a tag management or privacy solution. There's some of these sites that have upwards that we sample over 200 third parties collecting data or sharing. How do you manage that? And reality is, when we actually peel back the onion, most companies aren't aware that they have some of these things occurring on their site. So as a result, we think tag management and privacy solutions are very important. Today, honor and do not track is a bonus point. I would expect next year, for example, that you'll see that moving up into the base points, but today it's in the bonus point category. And then we lose points in the penalty area. For example, if your site is a private registration, meaning a consumer can't really figure out who is the owner, how to contact them, we don't think that's in the best interest of consumers, so you lose points. If you've had a data breach incident in the past 18 months, or an FTC or state settlement within the last 18 months, you also lose points. Any of these areas do not mean that you are automatically prevented from making the honor roll. And especially in the area of data breaches, breaches can happen to good companies. But we think about from the consumer perspective of online trust, it certainly impacts your brand. So those are the big buckets that we have. The do not track disclosure, a lot of people have given us some feedback on this. To be very clear, this is a legal requirement. As of January 1st, 2014, sites must state, if you have a consumer in California, must state, do you honor or do you not honor the track? So this is a legal requirement. Most companies are not in compliance with this. Also, the standards move through the W3C process. So again, it's a very important area there. Again, increase, and we, quite frankly, encourage all sites to be honoring the do not track signal. We think it's very important to honor consumers' requests not to collect and share data with third parties here. So we're happy to provide more details at the end of the call if you have detailed questions on that. I mentioned a privacy policy of layer notices and bonus points for icons, and this is one of our members' sites, Publishers Clearinghouse. Many of you are aware of who they are. They moved from a long form to a very short form here, and that links to the long form. So, basically reducing their word count some 80%. So you see this combination of how they organized it with different icons. So this is a great example. Again, you could use different icons. Everyone does have different icons, but this is something to aspire to. Or you could just look to a short notice, such as what's on the OTA site, where we have short sentences and then click for learn more. So again, trying to be really upfront with consumers, and if you want all the details, you can get the legalese by going learn more. So that's a good example, and encourage companies to think about that. And again, kudos to PCH for their efforts there. I mentioned the other area I want to kind of provide a little more clarity on. This has come up in some different discussions in the past. We score the privacy policy. This is a very manual process. We go through line item and we look at how are you talking about how do you collect data, how long do you retain it, how is it used, who is it shared with. Mentioned earlier the layered short notice is part of this. We also have tracking revisions and date stamping. Do you have that on your site? The do not track disclosure is very important, and something we also call notification of sharing. I'll give you some examples. So combined, these are the primary elements that can get you up to 50 points. But this is just on the privacy policy side. The other is what's actually occurring. So what's actually occurring is the number of trackers you have. So that can range from 0 to, I think, We've had a few hundred, and we're really focused on the trackers that aren't the analytics, but the ones that daisy chain with others that share information with other third parties. So again, collecting your information. So that's very important today. Two areas, some suggested language. So this is an example of some language that we would accept, and as part of your core points, if you don't support the do not track setting today. And this basically gives you, this is a good example of disclosure, where your company might say, you know, you respect these areas, but currently you're have not adopted. And you're taking a position that once it works its way finally through the entire standardized process, you'll accept it. So this is one example. Again, you should check with your own legal counsel on how best to present this, but this is one alternative that you have. The other is sharing with third parties. So this is a scenario that we look for. For example, what happens quite often is under legal processes, sometimes companies are forced to share data under court orders with other companies for lawsuits, and looking at quite often anti-competitive or employee issues. And so in this case, to the extent you're legally permitted to, you'll take reasonable steps to notify the consumer in the event that your information is provided to other third parties. So again, check with your own legal counsel, but we do look at this type of disclaimer in there and companies' commitment to take steps to notify you if they have to share your information with other third parties. So again, this is again primarily from a lawsuit type thing. Obviously, if you have a court order of you can't disclose that, then that really, you know, again, it addresses the legally permitted aspect of this clause. But we provide these examples to help companies. Our goal is to get everyone to make the honor roll. This is not on a curve. Our goal is to help you adopt and take a, you know, a consumer-centric view of these areas. So we've covered a tremendous amount in this time here. I know there's a lot of questions that will certainly take your time on and provide added drill down. But right now, our whole goal as is really important. And let me go back to the timeline. Actually, November, December, we solicited public comments. And it was through that process and then reviewing and doing some test analysis that we updated our methodology that we presented here today. We actually released it and posted on our website about a month ago. So, but our whole goal here today is to help provide you some additional resources. We'll begin actually testing in less than a month, understanding that there are 1,000 sites we're evaluating. Some of these tools are manual, some are scripted. And then our plan is the second week of June at an event in DC, we'll be releasing the results of this report. So with that, Maddie, want to see if you had any questions that have come in and encourage you to attendees to also submit questions.
Great. Yeah, I sure do, Craig. So I'm just kind of going to start at the top of the list here of questions that have come in through the